people. I'm going to get started with some housekeeping. We have a few minutes of updates and then we'll get right to the questions. So welcome again, everybody. It's so great to see you in the Zoomverse once again. We're really excited to be with everybody. I'm really grateful that everyone has joined us today. So this conversation will be recorded. Just wanted to let you know, and it'll be available to everybody after the event. So Catherine does a great job summarizing some of the resources that we'll hear about today. So she'll send that out, and a recording of the session will be one of those. So please mute yourself. You can send questions or resources directly to Catherine in the chat. You're also welcome to send them to me. Out of respect for our panelists, we do ask that you refrain from private messaging them during the event, just so we can cut down on distraction. Catherine will provide some contact information and links to their website in her resource email. So since much of grant writing is largely about building relationships and connections, you're welcome to add your LinkedIn URL to the chat to connect after the event. Terry is usually the host of our Meet the Funders events, but she's on vacation. So I'm excited to do my first event and a little nervous. So I hope this goes well. If you guys have any questions or feedback after, I'd love to hear it. I'm our Chief Partnership and Development Officer. So a lot of my day-to-day has to do with fundraising and relationship building. I oversee our marketing and events efforts as well as membership. So I have a lot of respect for all the work that everyone on this call does on a regular basis. And I really just invite us right now to take a minute and give ourselves a round of applause for what has been an incredibly difficult 18 months plus. There's so many shifting priorities, so much to be done. And that doesn't even take into consideration everything going on in our personal life. So just thank you for your commitment to your organization and to the nonprofit sector in general. So there's a couple other things I want to update you on. Here at CNM, we have about 10 workshops remaining for the year. So please check out our event listing. It's Catherine's going to chat that to y'all, but she will also send that in the post-event resource email. I want to let you know that we have some match grants funding still available thanks to the Frist Foundation. Those scholarships are available to members that are under a $2 million budget. And these nonprofit scholarships give our member organizations up to 75% discounts on up to 3 workshops a year. We also have, I think Joseph has a link to some young nonprofit scholarships that are still available, which I think they extended the date to today to apply for those. So Catherine will send you a link to those also. Thank you, Maddox. And lastly, if you had a chance to watch our virtual Salute to Excellence ceremony presented by PNC and with some support from some of the funders on this call, we'd love to have your feedback. We have a survey that's open right now. It's closing at the end of the month. And I know Salute next year, which will be in October and hopefully in person, feels really far away, but it's really helpful if we get some of your feedback on that. We know some of the considerations we're thinking about are evaluating our award categories, evaluating the judging process, making sure we're opening it up to new and diverse organizations and communities. So we'd love to get any additional feedback that you all have. So, today is about meeting the funders, but since we can't do that in person, we're going to do our best just to hear from each of them. So, I'll give you a little rundown on everybody who's on the call, and then we'll pass it to them. They'll tell us a little bit more about themselves and their organization, and then we'll answer some questions. We'll open up the end of the event for a Q&A where, throughout, like Catherine said, just chat in your questions, and we'll make sure that we pick some of those out to discuss. And since the last 18 months have been just such a struggle, and there's so many resources that we've built to help you. One thing we're doing new this year for Meet the Funders is we're going to close out with 15 minutes of Q&A with our team. So the funders are going to step off and we're going to ask you what you need, what kind of templates you might need for your proposals, what are your greatest struggles that are maybe more conversations between us as development humans rather than questions that we might direct to our funders. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Corinne Bergeron. She's the Vice President of Programs at the Frist Foundation. That title is changing soon, but I'll let her tell you about it. Corinne joined the First Foundation in 2016 and has over 20 years of experience in communications, public relations, and corporate social responsibility. In her current role, she works with nonprofits to help build their capacity, develop cross-sector partnerships, and direct their mission with measurable outcomes. She is a fantastic partner to CNM. We have a lot of thought partner conversations with her, and they're also a funder of CNM. So there's a lot of back and forth that helps us grow. Matt Deeb from their team is also on the call, and he's going to become more involved with some of their funding decisions and certainly their financials as they move forward. Also on the call, we have Michelle Gaston-Brown. She's a public policy manager at Amazon. After launching her legal career in 2008 and completing her doctorate in 2010, she joined the Nashville Chamber of Commerce, serving as a liaison to the Metro Nashville government. In her current role, Michelle utilizes her knowledge of local politics and community stakeholders to help Amazon be a great corporate citizen and serve the best interests of our Nashville community. So pleased she's here to join us today. We also have Joseph Gutierrez, the program officer at the Maddox Fund. Joseph started his career as an English teacher in South Korea before relocating to Nashville in 2014. In 2017, he graduated from Vandy with a master's in community development and action before joining the Maddox Fund. He serves as the executive director at the API Middle Tennessee, an Asian and Pacific Islander serving nonprofit working towards racial justice by supporting API communities. We're so thrilled to have you back, Joseph. Thanks for joining us today. And new to Meet the Funders is Lithia Mann. She's the Community Development Manager at Regions Bank. Lithia has been actively engaged in community development throughout the financial sector since 1990. Before joining Regions in 2019, she served as the Vice President of the Nashville Minority Business Center for nearly 12 years. Lithia is incredibly adept at assessing needs, generating options, and implementing collaborative solutions between clients and stakeholders. Lithia, thank you so much for making time today. So thank you everybody for letting me talk for a very long time, and we're going to move right into questions. So the first question is directed at everyone. We'd love to hear a little bit more about yourself, a little bit more about your organization. We're going to start with Corinne, please. And some of the things we might want to touch on in your introduction is, are there certain impact areas you do invest in, certain things you don't? Are there certain geographic areas? Just anything that kind of highlights for our attendees a little bit more about your organization. Corinne,
Sure.
thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Good to see everybody. Lots of familiar names and faces. Those of you who aren't aware, I'm moving into the CEO role in January. Many of you know our current CEO, Pete Bird, is heading into retirement, and he'll be working with us on the Art Museum and the Zoo grants, which are two big initiatives for the next year or so. But as Marissa alluded to, Matt Deeb is my replacement in the vice president role, and he'll be helping us with our programs and internal finance matters as well. So as far as focus area of the First Foundation, it is very broad. I consider us a broad foundation in that we fund a variety of different community issues, from access to childcare to food insecurity to homelessness. And we do it in a variety of ways, whether through collaborative, collective impact style funding, capacity building, everything from strategic planning to capital investments. So, it's hard. And, recently I would add emergency response funder, which probably a lot of us are now, given what's happened in Nashville the last couple of years. So looking forward to getting in the particulars of those areas that we support. Many of you are familiar with some of the initiatives I already mentioned, the Art Museum and the Nashville Zoo, and then a lot of human service work. So yeah, looking forward to the conversation today.
Sorry about that. Joseph, do you want to go next? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm Joseph Gutierrez, he, him. I'm the Education Program Officer at the Maddox Fund. So my main role is managing the education grants at the Maddox Fund and I guess communications too. But so the Maddox Fund, we primarily focus on education, youth, and wildlife conservation. And those three program areas sort of grow out the causes and the issues Dan and Margaret Maddox supported during their lifetime. I will say that we're currently on like a pause and trying to reevaluate how we practice and really thinking about the role of our work and just thinking about how we center diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in our work. So what we're really doing is carrying over our grants for like the next year and really taking this time to just be in community and rethink what we're kind of doing. So some of the things that we're currently doing was in the spring, we'll be starting our listening sessions again. So really just thinking and brainstorming with partners. And then we're currently also piloting a youth philanthropic advisory board. So we've put $100,000 in with a group of high school students in Antioch, and they'll be distributing that to the community. So they're looking at grant making in new and important ways. And I think it's always important, just to recenter youth in our work.
Thank you, Joseph. Michelle, would you like to go?
I would love to. Good afternoon, Michelle Gaston-Brown, Manager of Public Policy at Amazon. I would be remiss if I didn't say that my counterpart, Courtney Ross, should probably be here as well. She's also on the public policy team, but does a lot of our external engagement. But because we're on policy together, we're kind of a two-woman team representing Amazon in Nashville. So Amazon has our traditional pillars that anywhere in the world we've supported, which is disaster relief, because of our ability to scale out and get supplies from our warehouses pretty quickly. Our STEM education approach, specifically our Amazon Future Engineer program, that is in a lot of schools in Middle Tennessee, and we're hoping to get statewide soon. Homelessness, which is a big issue and concern, that branched out of our headquarters in Seattle. And those are kind of the areas that Amazon traditionally gives money through our Amazon in the community. What makes Nashville unique is that Nashville is the home of our third corporate office. And so while we have our traditional pillars, we also want to make sure that we're being a great community partner, a corporate partner, and we're focusing on a lot of hyper-local needs. So our process used to be we would go through the traditional 4 pillars and figure out where things align, but now it's really looking at what is the best fit for Nashville, what are the needs we hear about, what are the organizations we constantly hear about. I think we've done a really good job of making sure that we're hitting on some of the well-known needs, supporting the symphony, supporting symphony employees when they were out of work due to COVID. One of the first things we did when I first started, and it was just a few months pregnant, was the tornado hit. And so us just jumping out and getting involved in figuring out where can we get our line haul trucks in to bring supplies in to help the community. We have partnerships with the African American Music Museum, Center for Nonprofit, working with public schools to bring in robotics and things of that nature. It kind of runs the gamut, so to speak. We're involved in some greenways conversations, just anything that's in Nashville that is a community need.
Thank you. That's perfect, Michelle. We appreciate it. Lithia, you're next.
Had to come off mute. Yes, I am Lithia Mann, and I am the Community Development Manager for Regions, and I cover Middle Tennessee, East Tennessee, as well as a part of North Carolina and one county in Kentucky. So Regions is committed to individuals, families, and businesses to help them achieve financial success. And we really kind of focus on that inclusive growth. So we focus on priorities that complement our expertise and talents, and that way we can better serve our communities. 3 of our strategic priorities are economic and community development, education and workforce readiness, and financial wellness. I think I need to move to make my lights come back on, but I'll do that in a minute. And we believe that demonstrating our mission is also more than just writing checks. So we like for our associates to be involved. And so we allow them to volunteer with various organizations, providing 8 hours of activity a year for them to volunteer in the community. And, we do board service, we do all types of engagement with our nonprofits, because again, we want to be engaged and not just writing a check for the organizations.
That's fantastic. Thank you. So I think we have lots of questions that are set up before we kind of checked in with all the things in the chat. But I think one thing I'm noticing, or I know that about a lot of the attendees of this event, is it's mid-sized to smaller organizations. And one of the challenges they tend to have is capturing the attention of funders in our community, because there's lots of competition, but also because some of their initiatives or even the organizations themselves are new. So Corinne, I think I'd love to ask you to speak to this. Like, how can a smaller organization or community organization or grassroots organization capture the attention of a funder, especially when they're either just getting started or when they're working on a new project that doesn't have any historical data or success?
Yeah, what I would say is think about your role within the broader community around the area that you're serving and the population you're trying to reach, and be a part of that broader conversation. You know, we're all supportive of organizations that can help move the ball forward for the community. And a lot of times it is the grassroots organizations that are closer to their client voice. Embrace that fully and serve as a representative for the folks that you are trying to serve, to help the broader community reach whatever type of goal you're trying to reach. A good example would be our support of the 37208 fund, which is a new effort that we've partnered with the Healing Trust on. And that came up from the community. It came from a conversation that started at the council level around the high incarceration rate in North Nashville. And we know that's not the full story of North Nashville. We know that there's a rich history there and so many great people and art and culture that we want to be in a position to showcase. Well, the committee came together that included neighbors, included council members, and said, we need investment in these areas. And guess what? We want ownership of that investment. And so that put us in a position as a funder to say, along with the Healing Trust, hey, we see that this is what the community is asking for. You're actually representing what the neighborhood is requesting, and it was an easy thing for us to invest in. So embracing that role, and that's something that we all hear on a philanthropic level at a lot of our conferences. It's not it's definitely a respected area. You are an expert in your field the closer you are to the clients you're serving, and a lot of the time it is those smaller organizations.
Thank you for that. I think that's something I'd like to ask Michelle too. Michelle, you mentioned being focused on hyper local, but I think there's still that disconnect when you are a grant writer or a fundraising person working at a nonprofit, where you're like, I don't know how to make my proposal or my cause or my project attractive to a company like Amazon. And I wonder, is there something about collaboration or partnering with other organizations or other initiatives that are addressing some of the causes together? Like, how can an issue become big enough, or I don't want to say important enough, but how can they capture the attention of a larger company like yours?
I think for us, it's hearing, to Corinne's point, a lot of things that we get involved with. We will hear from council members or other nonprofits are focused on the issue, and we'll start doing our own research. Well, who's a key player in this? What are they doing in this? Are there any areas, are there any gaps that need to be filled? It's also just having conversations with people. I've had a chance to speak with a lot of the entities on this Zoom, and a lot of times people just connect you with someone else. Oh, have you talked to my friend so-and-so? They're working on grocery stores and food deserts, and we may not be familiar with the organization, but we'll definitely reach out and see, are there areas and opportunities to connect. The thing about Amazon with our giving in Nashville and throughout the state is that we aren't looking for a grant or a specific proposal. For us, it really is, oh, you want to put grocery stores in 37208, you want to bring in fresh produce, how can we support that? What does the funding look like? If you're newer and just starting out, the funding may be a bit different than if you're a long time, well-known organization, just because of the, it's the track record. We know everyone has a really great heart and a really great idea, but sometimes the devil is in the details, so to speak. But we are always looking to partner. And I think that there are a lot of smaller nonprofits that we're working with and partnering with that we've been able to support, but also say, hey, have you talked to this other group, and figure out areas to connect? Because for us, we're still new here, so to speak. We've been here about 3 years, and we're still learning. We see what Corinne is doing, what HCA is doing, what a lot of these larger entities are doing, but we also recognize that there are areas that kind of fit within our wheelhouse, and we want to support as well.
So that's really helpful. And if I if I'm thinking about my role in fundraising, I think, okay, so devil's in the details. I know we need to give you as much information as possible, but then we also hear from funders, I don't have the time to analyze or evaluate a long proposal. In your ideal world, Michelle, if someone sent you, like, what's the kind of information you'd want to see? Is it a one pager with some bulleted information? Like what would pique your interest in the fastest amount of time, maybe?
So at Amazon, we love a one pager. We do not do PowerPoints internally. That is our own personal thing that leadership has passed down. And so I think we're not looking for a long presentation. It really is the conversation. What do? We work in this underserved area. Here's who we can provide these needs to. This is how much the laptops will cost. This is how much it will cost to rent this space. So while we're working with the students, we can work with the parents on job fairs. For us, it's really just explaining what your goal is. What is your ultimate goal? We want to educate students on STEM. We want to figure out how to help parents get employment opportunities or learn more about how Amazon is hiring. We really love being able to connect what we do as a company with the community. We are hiring all the time in so many different areas within the company that we love an opportunity to share with people what we have going on, to bring in our talent into an area where we can engage with the community. So I think if we can align that way, that is perfect. But a one pager with your background, we always like to see who you're working with or where you're first asked. That's important too. And then always have a dollar amount. A lot of people come in and just say, well, whatever you want to give us. And we need some kind of parameter, because sometimes we learn people are like, oh, I want to do this and I need $50 million. And we're like, whoa, we need to walk this back a little bit. I love thinking big. That's one of our principles, but just what is this money going to? We're also still growing as a company. So how can we grow with you and your nonprofit? There are a lot that start out with 2 or 3 people working and then can grow up to 20. How can we support that?
Okay, that
was really long-winded. I'm sorry.
No, that is super detailed and perfect.
Your budget, go for it. We're more than happy to have a conversation.
No, that's great. I mean, that's something we were wondering before we started today, was how many questions do people have around like specific budgets that you submit with your proposal? And Lithia, that would be perfect for you. Regions, what kind of information do you hope to receive when people pitch projects?
Right. Well, we have a online portal, and so there's a set application in the portal, and I don't think it's too difficult to answer. So there are set questions. We do want a budget, and it's really based on your needs. So when people ask me how much should I ask for, I typically say, just state your need, document your need, show what it is, provide the budget, and then we will look at how we can help. And even if we can't fund the full amount, we will come in with something instead of just turning it down. So as Michelle mentioned, I got a request once from a new organization. They wanted $400,000. That's a huge amount. And so we were able to dial it back and find an amount that we were comfortable with, that we could support the program. So again, the amount is based on your need, documenting your need, how you're going to address it, what's the impact going to be, because we do like to follow up after the grant has ended with an impact report. And also we, stay in contact with our agencies throughout, our fund, whoever we fund throughout, to say, how is it going? How can we help? Have your needs changed? Is there something else we can do? How can we even support you again with volunteers? So we stay engaged with them throughout the whole process.
That's awesome. That leads into another question we'd like to ask everyone is, how much reporting do you want to hear? If there's a change in the project, obviously that's something that should be communicated, but on average, is it a mid-year report and a year-end report? Maybe talk to us a little bit about that, Lithia, and then we'll go to Joseph.
From the nonprofit that we fund?
Yeah, for a project that you're in funding with.
Right. We ask for a report 6 months after the project ends. So they will say what that activity is, because we really prefer to support programming. So they will say, with the pandemic, we did some grants for people to help with eviction prevention, helping people stay in their homes, meet their rent obligations. And so we asked for an impact report 6 months after that project ends. So they'll put the date in, if it's an annual project, then 6 months from there. So right after that project ends is what we're looking for. And I think it's 6 months. I need to look on it, but it's on the website as to what that time frame is. But we ask for an impact report after the project ends.
Okay, and aside from that official reporting, do you appreciate an email, with a project update here and there, or does that just feel like too much to bother with all of your grantees?
Right. I can say I have not asked for updates throughout the year because, again, we do fund a lot of programming. So we like to keep up with what has happened at the end, the major impact. And if there's something that it's a bigger grant that we do want to keep in contact, we will reach out to them and ask again, how's it going? Is there anything else we can do to help you make you meet your goals or help you meet the impact that you want to have? So typically just that follow-up is good enough.
Great, that's good to know. Joseph, I'd love to hear how the Maddox Fund likes to receive reports or updates, and maybe a little bit more about your process. I know you said it's changing, you're in the midst of changing, so please share.
Yeah, I think, one of the things to note is just that we make various kinds of grants, so we're not just limited to programming. So we've always been kind of loose with the way we look at evaluation. And
Joseph, your microphone is a little quiet, I think.
Oh, yeah, I'll just speak louder. Sorry.
Better.
I think one of the things to note is that we recognize that qualitative data does have its limitations, and it's only really good at sort of just looking at the floor, right? Recognizing, for education programs that some measurement of academic achievement is just the bare minimum, but, programs and organizations are doing so much more than that. So narrative and just meeting with folks is actually a better way for us to understand maybe what the ceiling looks like. And we're really open for communication. Typically, we understand, things change. If one of your staff members transitions to another organization and you can't get the program started one semester, we recognize that happens, and just, typically we just ask for an email, just keep us updated. That's kind of where we're at, and what we're kind of looking for. And again, I really think, there's some modes of evaluation and stuff that really kind of echo hyper-capitalist kind of language. So I think we also collectively, both philanthropic institutions and the nonprofits, also need to think a little bit harder about the way we look at, what do outcomes really mean?
That's a really great point, especially when outcomes are often very long-term. Corinne and Michelle, if either of you would like to answer your preferences on reporting and communication, we'd love to hear that too.
Yeah, we're pretty grant based on that. So it kind of depends. If it's a capital project and you said in your application that these were the milestones to look out for, we'll check in around those milestones. I'm looking at our follow-up list, which is usually about 175 to 200 grants every quarter before our board meeting, to say, all right, which ones haven't we heard from in a while? Which ones had some of these milestone dates coming up that I can check in with and see if they're hitting their goals on that. So we really base it on grant, and then I'll just email you and ask you how it's going. And in some cases, as part of the grant conversation, when you get the grant, I'll say, can you check in a few months and let me know? And I'll put a little note on my calendar if I haven't heard from them. So that's kind of how we do follow up.
So we usually make a list as we're having the conversation, working on.
Michelle, your mic is also a little quiet. You might want to get a little closer.
Is it? Okay, can y'all hear me better now?
It's still a little soft.
Okay, what about now?
Better.
Oh, I had my mic plugged in. Look at that. There. Gotta love technology. No, for us, usually when we're discussing the details of the partnership, we're trying to see what the nonprofit is looking to get out of this. What is their overall goal? And that's typically, we're just trying to support them and help them reach their goal in the community. So we'll make notes, and when it's over, before we even have a chance to ask, they're usually following up with us about, here are the great things we did, here are some lessons learned, here's what we're thinking about for next year. Typically, they're like, and we'd love to secure sponsorship for next year if we can, and increase the amount, which we always appreciate, because once you're in the budget, it's easier to increase the funding than to kind of start brand new for us. A lot of people in leadership, And on our team, we're also very interested in the types of groups and projects that we're working on. They're a little different than what we traditionally work on as a company. So Courtney and I are always sending notes or, sending one pages up to leadership saying, hey, this is what we've done. This was the impact on the community. This is how much was fundraised. And this is how it fits in our overall plan of being a really great community partner.
I love that. I think that goes back to the easy, simple one pager that just has notes and some information that it doesn't take a marketing team to create it. It's just a couple highlights that can share that your investment has made an impact, and that's great for you and your team too.
Yes.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to Q&A in about 5 to 10 minutes, but there's a couple more questions that I'd love for all of us to answer. Social justice and racial equity, there are bigger budgets for that now and a lot of programming to support. So I'd love to hear how some of your organizations are either directly funding those types of projects, and if so, or if it's different from other pieces of your funding or different approaches to your funding. Just talk to us a little bit about that. Joseph, I know that's a big focus for the Maddox Fund. So I'd love to hear you start that off.
Yeah, and I'm just going to drop a link in the chat for some of the analysis and self-reflection we kind of did as an organization. Just looking at our past 5 years, we really recognize, that our grant making has gotten more diverse and inclusive. So we lowered the barriers to applying. We simplified the application with a few other foundations who moved to a common application. And what we found is that, we are supporting more organizations led by people of color. But the one thing that we really recognize, though, is that, our amount of support to them hasn't actually gone up. So we're really recognizing and rethinking that and how we look at it. So, it's just like we give the same small grants to organizations led by people of color when we really need to be thinking about, how can we support these smaller grassroots organizations at a larger scale, and rethinking about how we scale back down from larger institutions who've traditionally dominated the philanthropic sector. So, we're just really rethinking about that and being very honest and thinking about, what that looks like. In that link, you'll see a link to a 5-year comparison that has actually most of the summary of our data, but I'm happy to share if anybody wants to talk a little bit further about it. Beyond that, and just thinking how we center that in the application process, we're really thinking about, how we can help support and bring along organizations. So some of our diversity, equity, inclusion grants go to organizations who are seeking consulting or looking to bring on and do some training, either at CNM. So some of the earlier diversity and equity kind of anti-racist trainings were also sponsored by Maddox at CNM. So those are some of the things we're kind of really looking at as an institution and thinking about, just generally what the sector is and re-envisioning and reimagining what those barriers are in our programming, right? So when we look at wildlife conservation, we have to recognize that there's a systemic racism that ties it to that people of color don't own land. And that's something we have to grapple with and think about the organizations and programs that we're supporting that are both really thinking about this on a systemic level and then kind of advance the populations and communities where they live.
Thank you. That's perfect. Anyone else want to pick that up?
I would just add to Joseph, the common application has been a great resource for us as well. And, I think that there's both internal and external work. There's what we're trying to do internally. We don't require a grant application, just sort of taking pieces of, bureaucracy within philanthropy and making it more conversational and easier to talk with, and accessibility. And there's also what we're asking of partners. And really it's about questions on, strategic planning. Is equity part of that work? In some cases, we've funded just kind of equity focused strategic planning that then folds in some of that work to their current vision as an organization. What is your plan organizationally to ensure you're representing all of Nashville? So those are just examples of some of the questions that we generally ask.
I wanted to say that Regions did make a commitment to invest. It was a $12 million commitment to invest more heavily in wealth building initiatives for communities of color in, response to the, racial justice and economic justice and elevating racial equality and equity.
I think with Amazon, we have given to a lot of the can you all hear me? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
We have given to a lot of the traditional social justice organizations on a national and local level for years. And I think for us in 2020, we realized as a company that it is a lot more of an equity issue for us. How are we specifically supporting women-owned businesses, small and minority-owned businesses? How are we making sure that when you log on to our website, you don't have to search, you know, fall down the rabbit hole trying to find Black-owned business or Indigenous-owned businesses? How can we put that on the forefront? What kind of grants can we provide to these businesses to help them grow? And I think that translated into our community engagement. We recognize that a lot of people are giving money and funds towards North Nashville. That is, you know, traditionally the African-American part of town. There's a lot of underserved and unmet needs in that community. But what about the rest of the city? We have a very diverse population. How are we making sure that, you know, for every dollar we're giving towards an African-American organization, we're also supporting the Hispanic Family Foundation, or working with the Kurdish community, or with our new, with the Afghanistan community that is coming here. And so it's just trying to figure out where can we fit in, what is the need, and how can we meet that need? Another thing is with our Housing Equity Fund, equity is in the title because we recognize that in affordable housing, it is traditionally the same key players who work in development, who lead these nonprofits, and who receive the bulk of the grant funding. And that's why we set aside $125 million to exclusively support minority-led developers, minority-led nonprofits, to make sure that these underrepresented communities have a seat at the table and are able to say, this is what affordable housing should look like. This is how it should look for us. It shouldn't be different in North Nashville or South Nashville than it would be in West. So I don't think any of us are doing it right, but I think it's an opportunity for us to just kind of evaluate ourselves as we look at our end of the year giving, and are we being equitable? Are we being diverse? And are we being intentional? And can we own up to our mistakes if we didn't get it right this year?
Amazing. We just learned a lot about all of your different organizations. That's super helpful. Before we go to Q&A, I think one thing that everyone wonders when you're working in development, kind of pivoting here, unrestricted funding or general operating funding versus program funding. I think a lot of us are thinking, okay, well, we've all taken some pretty drastic new directions in terms of our fundraising efforts, whether it's pandemic related and working remote related, or more better focus on social justice and cultural identity. Just things are changing. So as we're developing new programs, that often means new staff, or that means increased operational support. So we've talked already about budgets and just telling, like Lithia said, we want to see the need. I think Michelle said that too. You want to see the need, you want to see the overall budget. But break down for us maybe a little bit about how you look at general operating and unrestricted funding versus programmatic funding. Whoever would like to start.
Well, this is Lithia. One thing I wanted to clarify was that we asked for an impact report 60 days after the program ends. But I said long before, but it's 60 days after the program ends. Okay. But we, like most organizations, prefer to support programming. But again, you have, of course, it takes people to make that program happen. So with that budget, we're just looking at how will this help you grow your organization? How will it help you improve your impact, improve your services? So it's, you know, showing the need and how you're going to, the funding will help you meet that need. If it's adding staff, if it's adding programming. So just, again, showing the need, showing the budget, letting us know how it's really going to make a difference to grow, build capacity with your organization.
Thank you.
I'll speak for Maddox because we kind of have a little bit more strict in terms of what our mission is, because we're tied to Dan and Margaret's legacy. So the way we've looked at general operating support is that organizations need complete mission overlap. So education-based organizations are a good example if they solely work in education. But like so we'll make general operating support grants to them, but for organizations doing like more general, like immigrant and refugee relief, even though they have education programs that will fund, we might not make a general operating support since their mission is much more broad than ours. So that's just kind of philosophy we've taken behind it for the past few years.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's something we're always in conversation with our board on. We do a lot of general operating. I mean, Frist Art Museum is probably our largest, most significant operating grant every year. And then we do a lot in what we call kind of civic infrastructure. And that would be CNM, Hands on Nashville, Young Leaders Council, Community Resource Center. Probably about 15 organizations that I would qualify as that. And we're always trying to balance that where we have flexibility with our budget every year to respond to community needs. But we know that unrestricted general operating is really what organizations want. And so, COVID is a good example where, because we had flexibility and we had built that into our budget, we could step right in and give $1 million to United Way to set up the COVID relief fund. And we gave, on top of our typical unrestricted grants to partners, additional funding for organizations like Conexión Americas that completely threw their mission out the window to focus on COVID response for a population that desperately needed it. So we try to reward those current partners that are having to pivot to respond to community needs and invest doubly in them to help support them to do that.
I think for Amazon, it is a blend. If you have a capital campaign that you are working on, we definitely know that those are critical to the life mission of the organization. And we have definitely supported a good number of capital campaigns in the community. I think the crux of our giving is usually programmatic, but again, we realize you can't have one without the other. So it's really a case-by-case basis for us.
Thanks, Michelle. That's helpful. So I think we'll go to questions from our participants now. There's some really great content in the chat. So I'm going to read a few that I have pulled out. But I think at this point, we're happy if you want to raise your hand or put a question in the chat now that some things have been answered, and we can try to get to that. But one of the questions we had a few moments ago was for organizations that are dedicated to capacity building and maybe not direct service, so policy, advocacy, capacity building, do any of you dedicate some portion of your funding to that or have interest in that? And or is there a way for organizations to storytell around those things that somehow tie it into things that matter to you? So I think it's public policy, advocacy, and capacity building, or even systems change work. A lot. I know that the Frist Foundation has, previously supported some of our systems change work at CNM. Corinne, do you still kind of look at things in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we don't necessarily segment that out. I mean, we want really all of our organizations to be engaged in advocacy. So it really depends on what the space is. If you're working on parks or greenways, you probably want to know which council member is aligned with you on that issue. And so some of our questions will come up in grant requests where we'll say, like, do you work with Metro, or what is that connection point there? How do you advocate for your organization within that space? Another good example, one of our big partners is Project Return, who works with formerly incarcerated. And we've seeded a lot of their social enterprise work. And, they have an advocacy arm because obviously that population, there are so many systems in place that are detrimental to that population. So, we really look at it kind of like equity is organizations that have capacity to kind of build that into their current model, and that a lot of them that are successful on these community issues, you have that piece as part of what you do.
Thanks, Corinne. Joseph?
Yeah, Maddox's work around advocacy has typically usually been limited to the wildlife conservation kind of dimension of our work, just thinking about, environmental work and like advocating for like ephemeral streams, water quality, conservation work, has typically been that, but we're still trying to actually really figure out what it means for education and youth, given that most of the organizations and programs we've supported have been in the direct services kind of line of work. So if you really do have any thoughts about it, just shoot me an email. I'm actually more than willing to learn, because that's one of the things we're trying to focus on in this next year is just, orienting ourselves around to the work and how we can best advocate for our partners who are doing this. So just honestly, send me an email.
anytime we can align our community engagement with our advocacy piece, I mean, that just warms my political loving heart. And so I know a lot of the things that we advocate for are community issues, but I think of our work working against LGBT discriminatory legislation at the state. And I think of how that aligns with a lot of our giving to different communities, but our work serving on the LGBT Chamber of Commerce board. I think for us, if we can get everything in line, that is perfect. I think there are opportunities for us to advocate on a lot more issues, but I think it really is more of an educational component because I have things that I will advocate for, you know, in my 9 to 5 work life. But then it's also how do you balance that with what's going on in the community that we may not be lobbying for as a company, but it impacts our employees. And I think that speaks to your ability to attract and retain employees and what does that look like. And so it's a constant conversation that we're having internally as far as does our advocacy align with our giving and how does our giving shape our advocacy.
Thanks, Michelle. Okay, so we've got 2 questions in the chat that are sort of similar. One from Dick Brown, one from Joni Downey. How important are nonprofit partnerships on an issue or a project? And the second is, do you normally look for organizations to partner with other organizations, or do you look at how they stand alone? Anyone?
We don't believe in forced marriages. So if we don't want to force anyone to work together who doesn't want to, that has not been successful for the most part when we have tried to get people to collaborate. I think there's opportunity to give and support everyone. And that's something we learned. We don't just say, oh, we worked with housing, cross that off, can't work with any other housing organizations, or oh, we work with the homeless and that's done. I think that the thing about Nashville and the nonprofits in the region is that they're all so diverse in what they do, and they all have specific areas on a broad community topic they work on, and we can support them all. So for us, it's how you stand alone. If you want a partner, that's great, but we also accept you just as you are.
Lithia?
Yes, I can say Regions, we work however you want to work. So when you submit the proposal, if you're working together, that's fine. If you're standing alone, that's fine. So it's the proposal the way you present it to us. So we work with both organizations, working separately or in a partnership. But of course, you know, the more synergy there is, you know, that helps the community. But again, it's based on how the nonprofit wants to move forward with their request.
So you're looking for a strong proposal that has already taken that into consideration and the partnership makes sense and adds an impact. Okay, thank you. We have a couple other, Corinne, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, and I'll add and kind of build in Allison's question there about, yeah, I mean, we definitely encourage and like collaboration, but we also understand like we can't expect organizations to work together on everything. It really just is issue dependent, I would say. You know, childcare is a good example where there are efforts underway for organizations to work together, and some are doing that actively, and that's great, but we don't want to force that. You know, with regards to Allison on duplication, you know, where I see that more often than not is a national group or an organization that's new that maybe has other locations in other markets that sets up in Nashville and says, we're going to do this related to, you know, food insecurity. And, you know, we often, our antenna goes up just to say, do you know that there are these other organizations that are already serving that population? Are there ways that you can partner with them? And so, you know, when we're asking questions like that, we want folks that are new to know the space and not come in and say, oh, we're going to do the same thing as this organ and not even realize they're doing the same thing. But I see that most often with national groups.
That's a great point. Joseph?
Yeah, I think in the scope of partnership, I think it's particularly to think about white-led institutions and how they're partnering with community of color and thinking about how that is authentic and really thinking about, you know, just not like this level of tokenism of like the single person of color on your board, and or like, so really thinking about how structures are kind of that. So that's one of the things we think about when we look at partnerships, particularly for white-led institutions.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to another question that Emerald asked, and I think we might have had another, no, it was just from Emerald. If anyone wants to pick up the question about the capital campaign that incorporates land acquisition, do any of y'all support? Michelle, you mentioned capital campaigns are something that you know that it's fundamental to an organization's needs, but I think that land acquisition piece was asked by someone else too.
I don't think that we have, in the capital campaigns that we have supported, I think that they already had the land. It was just building the building. I think that is something we would consider because being in Nashville, and again, putting on my affordable housing hat, we recognize the cost of land can be a barrier to people building facilities that will help the long-term sustainability of the organization. So I think it's something we consider. And so again, it's just a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we've done that as part of capital campaigns. Usually it's built into the cost of the capital campaign. So they'll put forth a proposal saying, this is our goal, this was what we're trying to raise. These are the pieces that make up that. And in some cases, they may not be ready to give us the full construction cost, but they'll give a kind of general idea of this is what we want to build. This is how much the land is that we've targeted. This is our timeline, kind of those parameters with it.
Yeah, and this isn't helpful in the immediate future, but Belinda from the Community Foundation does a capital campaign course at CNM, and I took it recently. It was super helpful. Everything that she laid out are things that I've experienced in the real world. So I highly recommend that. One question that we had a little bit further up was about, when we as development people are wanting to honor the investments from our funders, our questions around like marketing and storytelling are a thing for us. Like we spend a lot of time on it. And I have found that foundation donors don't typically have as much interest in their exposure benefits as corporate funders. They're coming out of different budgets and a different approach. But if anyone has opinions on maybe a great experience you've had with stewardship or storytelling or marketing exposure, I would love to hear that.
I mean, that's a bit hard for us because I've never done a press release related to our giving. And it's just kind of, I came from corporate philanthropy, and that was just part of the communication that was so crucial because you need your employees to understand and embrace what you're doing in the community. So I'm just kind of on the other side of that now, where that's just not a function of ours. I mean, the most successful stewardship relationships we have are just folks that we've built a really great relationship based on trust. And I know that that person is going to call me if the project runs awry, and I'm not going to have to read about it in the paper. And I know that we have that kind of strong connection just from a partnership standpoint.
Thanks, Corinne. That's really helpful. And Michelle, I know you have to jump in a few minutes, so if you wouldn't mind answering that. And that's a good point that Corinne raised, is there's also your employees. There's your whole sort of universe of stakeholders who's interested in how you're engaging in the community. So marketing probably isn't the right word, but if you could speak to that.
Yes, usually when we are making partnerships, there's always some kind of announcement. We may not be marketing it to all the media, but we want to share it internally with our employees because you never want them to see work we are doing in the community and they're blindsided by it. So you always make sure that we're providing a ton of notice. If there are events and opportunities for them to participate or volunteer or support, just letting them know. We have a PR team that works exclusively with our external engagement team, and they tend to work with the nonprofit. If they have a PR representative, or if it's just working with one of the staff members of the nonprofit directly, just to make sure that we're able to highlight the great things they're doing in the community. And then show ways in which we're supporting. But our goal is really to amplify the nonprofit in their work. So if we can help others support, then that's a great goal for us.
Thank you. Lithia, did you want to touch on that at all?
Again, we do like to amplify what the nonprofit is doing. So when we make announcements about the contributions that we made, it's always looking at how can we also help that nonprofit tell their story to, build more capacity for giving. So it's just a win-win for everyone. It lets the community know how Regions is engaged in the community, and also how that nonprofit is really making communities better.
So back to our one pager and bulleted updates, like the quickest kind of quips we can provide for you to share makes your job easier. That's great. Okay, well, Michelle, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm sure everyone's grateful to hear from you. We appreciate your time and your support.
Yes, thank y'all. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Catherine, have I missed any questions in the chat that you want to lift up?
We had one question about looking for funding for organizations that are local in Nashville, but support communities overseas.
I should have mentioned and I don't think I did, our focus is generally Davidson County, Nashville. You know, obviously a lot of the organizations we support stretch out from there a little bit, which is great and fine, but that's our focus.
And I can say from Regions, most of our focus too is on where we have relationships as far as where we're in the market, because we feel if people in that market are trusting us with their deposits and their business, then we should be contributing back to those communities. So we typically limit our contributions to the markets that we serve.
Yeah, and Maddox's funding is limited to the 41 county Middle Tennessee region by our bylaws. I will note that actually most foundations located in Tennessee, majority of their funding actually does stay in Tennessee. It's somewhere like upwards of 77%. I just posted an SECF report, and it's actually an overview of foundations here in Tennessee. And they update it. This data is based on 2018, but it's somewhere in there. I think that's where I read it. But if it's not in there, just shoot me an email and I'll find it.
Thank you, Joseph. You have so many great resources. We did not help the person who is looking for funding for non-local causes, but what I will say from some experience I have working with a nonprofit that had a presence in West Africa, there are a lot of relief. There are global relief funds that are either initiated with the local government, you know, our federal government, and then of course back to the point that everyone is making, that building partnerships on the ground where you are giving support is probably your best bet to either find government funding in those communities, global or international, or looking for some funding here that might be dedicated to communities outside of the United States through the government. Catherine, are you seeing? Let's see. Yes, Don, thank you for the reminder. We have a couple different tools at CNM that connect to grants, both local and afar. So Catherine will make sure that we share those out. Anyone else have a question that we haven't covered?
We had another question earlier a while back on applying for multi-year grants.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we often hear, I guess I had a question about timeline and that multi-year issue. When do you want to hear about funding requests? Is it the end of this year, for next year? And then for those multi-year needs, how do you just want to hear about it and you want it to be requested each year, or do you commit to multi-year grants?
We have a rolling deadline, so we accept applications on an ongoing basis. It just depends on the request whether or not it'll go before a board, which meets quarterly. But usually the nice thing about quarterly means we have a meeting coming up, so that timing works well for organizations. It also allows us to not be bombarded during a certain time. Being a relatively small staff foundation, we have 3 full-time, 4 now, but almost 3 full-time employees. It can be challenging around those deadlines otherwise. So that works for us. And then the second part of your question around general operating multi-year commitments, those general operating grants are multi-year. What we just ask for every year is a check-in and kind of an update and see what's changed with the organizations. In some cases, we'll give more, depending on kind of what the plans are for that year. So just continuing that conversation, those annual check-ins.
Yeah, and Regions, our portal is open year round, but of course, when you get to the end of the year, the budget is pretty much gone, but our portal is open year round. If you're looking to submit something for the next year, we should start having a conversation before then to, understand what the need is. And as far as multiple year commitments, those are very rare. So we do prefer that you submit your request annually.
Maddox has made multi-year grants, but in the past, most of our grant making has been on an annual grant cycle and single-year grants. But that's part of what we're reassessing. If there's anything that the pandemic has showed us, that a single grant cycle each year makes it difficult to be responsive to the community. So that's just where we're headed. And rethinking, like, potentially does a rolling deadline make more sense for us?
Thank you, guys. Anything else?
I've got one more question in the chat from Amanda Tate. She wanted to ask if we can speak to the intersection between sustainability and philanthropy, recognizing that climate change exacerbates community need and impacts both nature and people. How do you guys as funders plan to address this global issue at a local level?
Well, Joseph has to start on this, and then but you're
well, that's part of like what we're thinking about more critically, and we'll actually be having like a session where we're re-envisioning what our environmental conservation work kind of looks like. I will say that, you know, actually a lot of the conversation around sustainability has been in a lot of ways colonized. And I think we actually don't think about, you know, like what are local and indigenous movements for sustainability. And like, I think part of it is, you know, recognizing, you know, like, we're like, there's like a lot of attention being paid to like sustainable farming here in Middle Tennessee. We're not like recognizing like women farmers in South America who've always been doing that. So I think like part of the discourse needs to shift a little bit. And I will say just a lot of it needs to be on more corporate accountability. And that's kind of it. So I don't know where Maddox is headed on what we can make change with, given how little we actually can and like the scope of our funding, but it's something we're thinking about.
Yeah, we don't necessarily have a funding focus around climate change, I would say, but it's hard, right? It impacts everyone and everything. So it's kind of like, yeah, we kind of do, I guess. I mean, there are things you can, I mean, obviously we've invested in parks, whether it's Centennial Park or Warner Parks, and that's something we're continuing to try and grow and diversify that group in particular. But yeah, I think anything in particular beyond kind of what is beneficial to the overall community around public spaces and building out that system.
Well, one thing I want to add too, I'm sure you all are familiar with the Urban Green Lab. One of the things that's great about them is they're working to help us localize sustainability. These are my words, not theirs, but like, how can we as nonprofits and as for-profits, and how can we actually look at making small changes internally with our stakeholders? So I think one of the cool things that they're working on, or have been already working on, I guess, is like a rating system of how sustainable you are. So I think, I know this goes back to partnerships. We're working with them to try to expand that program to help some of our members, going to try to fundraise to help some of our members with the fee for service piece of that. So I think it's just about education on every level. And back to everyone's point here about a great proposal and a great story and an impactful project, the funding is out there to match it. We just have to be able to figure out what that story is. And so Urban Green Lab, I think, is a great place if you are interested in sustainability, and if that's a piece of what you do as a nonprofit, working with them to figure out how to convey that to funders in a new way might be helpful. So from Jesse Strauss, we have, for an organization new to your foundation or fund, do you prefer to have an informal exchange prior to any formal application? Is email or phone preferable? Or do you not have much capacity for these conversations? Do you perceive cold proposals as a missed opportunity?
Yeah, we're all for informal exchange because we don't want you taking time to complete an application or a big PowerPoint or something if it's not going to be a fit for us. So I try to be respectful in return of people's time. So if I get, for example, an email about an organization that's health issue focused, that wouldn't be a fit for us. We do broad health disparity funding, but we don't do particular initiatives related to a health condition, for example. I'll say immediately in an email, thank you so much for reaching out. I'll explain our focus area and say, you know, not a fit for us. And, you know, but otherwise we're pretty open to conversation. I just don't want to waste your time, you know, if I don't see that avenue based on our board's direction.
And I can say Regions operates pretty much the same way. I prefer to have a conversation with you. Again, we receive an email from someone and I'll follow up, but yes, that fits within our 3 priorities, or, of course that expands, but that fits within our priorities, or it does not fit within our priorities, but we can have a conversation to see, is there another way we can help? So yes, pre-conversations are great before they submit that application.
Yeah, Maddox takes cold applications and has funded them in the past, but most cold applications don't go through the full funding or review process because they're outside of our giving priorities. But yeah, honestly, just pick up the phone or shoot an email to Maddox. So that's my job. So it's honestly, don't feel bad. Just make me do my job. That's okay.
I've got one question from Alyssa DeTuro, who is asking about how you guys are considering childcare and how it plays into the work that we do, and who works for nonprofits, thinking as Nashville as a whole right now is kind of a childcare desert.
Yeah, this is a huge issue and we're tuned into it. We're trying to figure out ways what are the leverage points for private philanthropy. I mean, we support some individual nonprofits that are working in childcare and understand that the model that they are trying to make work isn't functional at its core. And if they are able to make it work, it's pretty much a miracle. And they've created all these funding streams, and we definitely try to be one of those funding streams for that. But we would love to see our community take on this issue as a whole. And I know some of our folks that I've seen pop up here are working on that. So thank you for the extra time you're spending on that, on some collaborative efforts, because we as a community need to address this. It is past time, and I think COVID only exacerbated the problem, but it's not going away. And I believe strongly that there needs to be some movement. The challenge is in other communities that we've looked at, a lot of it is led by metro government or state government. I know the state is looking at that. Commissioner Carter, we've had meetings with other funders. And so there's a lot of opportunity, I still think, with federal dollars coming in, that we could be at an important point in actually being able to take some steps forward. So for all of you working in childcare, thank you.
Lithia, did you want to speak to that, or are you off mute just because you're off mute?
Oh, just accidentally off mute.
Okay. One thing I want to mention about that is, all of us who work in the nonprofit sector know that our salaries don't look as cute as working in the for-profit sector. And that could be really hard. So childcare is a big piece of that. It's a very expensive effort on a family's budget. And CNM has been working on has a proposal for a compensation study for the nonprofit sector. And this will also look at wage disparities amongst different marginalized groups. So that's the proposals with Elevate Consulting, and that'll have some cool information. We're just figuring out what our next steps are on it. But I think the goal there is to then advocate for and start to tell the story around the importance of our work and how we can ask for additional funding attached to programmatic funding so that we can, increase our salaries over time. We have 5 more minutes, and if we don't have any more questions, we're going to go ahead and say thank you to our funders and let them have their time back. Anything else coming through on the chat? Any other questions coming to mind for any of our guests? Okay. All right. Well, Corinne, Joseph, Lithia, thank you so much for your time. This has been a really good conversation, and I think we've all learned a lot.
Thank you for the opportunity. And anyone can reach out to me at any time. I'd love to discuss any requests that you may have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, Joseph. And for everybody else interested in staying on and just chatting about development and fundraising and all of our challenges, we'd love to have you.
Since it's just a smaller group of us, if you guys want to just come off mute and just ask your questions, go for it.
Hi, this is Michelle, and someone in the chat asked, will the contact information be sent to us? So I didn't want that to be go unnoticed, because it is because some of us didn't get to write down all the contact information for everyone.
Yes, ma'am. You got it. Yep. That's one of the benefits of this. You'll have everyone's information. We'll link you to their websites that give you a little more information on their approach to fundraising. They've all been really gracious and opened up the channels if you want to reach out to them directly.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for attending today.
I just wanted to ask if possible. Let's see, I think I'm off of mute.
You are.
I am totally brand new nonprofit. We opened a center in June of this year, Spring Hill Enrichment Center, and we've put in we're just south of Nashville, and I've already filed all the paperwork for our nonprofit status. So we know that the good old IRS is behind. And so, of course, our Tennessee paperwork, you're recognized, of course, your nonprofit corporation. However, I don't have that beautiful determination letter that would allow me to actively reach out. And that's been a stop for me as of late. So, and it doesn't look like I probably won't have that letter until the first of the year. So they're very behind. Do you have any suggestions, or is there any I know that I have the IRS paperwork that says, you're recognized, it'll be retro, but that really doesn't do anything when I'm seeking funding or assistance, or even in my beginning stages of a grant writing efforts. I mean, I'm so green. So just any suggestions to that?
Yeah, well, Brandy, thank you for telling us your story, and I'm sure we'd all love to hear more about what you're working on. I'd love to hear anybody else weigh in on this, but I can speak from personal experience. The nonprofit that I mentioned a while ago that was global, was a partnership with a village in West Africa and our office here, and we started that nonprofit, and so we went through that whole process. It was like a year and a half before we had our official paperwork. But I think what we might want to keep in mind is something that Michelle said from Amazon, that it's just a one-pager about your intent and the things that you're doing. I think now, especially with all of the movement in community building and grassroots organizations, and knowing that you can serve your community better than larger organizations often can, if you can express that intent. And I don't even know that it's important to let them know that you don't have your papers yet, because that's kind of irrelevant. That's just like a tax status. At the end of the day, that work that you're doing and an introduction to them, I would just take the opportunity tomorrow or this week and reach out to everyone who was on this with a couple, one pager about what you're doing, and maybe look at their website first and make sure that your projects align with their funding priorities. Does anybody else have anything to weigh in on that? And Brandy, we have some other resources that we'll connect you to that might be helpful as you're getting started with your new initiative. So
greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Brandy, hey, this is Dawn Stone. I'm the one, I can't turn my camera on, it'll hang me up. If you don't mind, send me an email, dawn@cnm.org. So there are a couple of things that you can do. I work with a lot of grassroots organizations and startup entrepreneurs that are always in this 4 million or less budget. So whatever I can do to help get you connected, in addition to what Marissa has for you in our agency, let me know. And I have some people right now. I've got some freelance grant writers who charge by the hour as well, that are people of color that have experience in this space. So I can connect you with them.
Well, and Brandy, Dawn's fantastic to know, because she is in the space of community building, and sometimes the funds that we're raising, I love our soundtrack. I don't know if that's Dawn's or what, but
that is Xavier Stone. Look, okay, y'all. That's my son. He has to play everything on 10. I'll mute.
So no, it's good. We needed some fun. But Brandy, she's great to know, because CNM, as we move forward in our fundraising to support Dawn's role, that's building community for CNM, there might be some way that your work fits in with some of that funding. So just connect with her and let's see if we can help.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I say something?
Please. Hi, Nella.
Hello, how's everybody doing? I'm Nella Miss Pearl of Brooklyn Heights Community Garden, and I'm gonna be as brief as possible. We have we've been in existence over 12 years here out on Northeast. We have community garden / urban farm, and I've been in a relationship with a church on the corner for the last 20 years, and then they are selling their property, and so I just asked them. I asked him 10 years ago, when you get ready to sell your property, can you sell it to Brooklyn Heights Community Garden? He said, sure. So it's upon us right now to purchase this property. We're moving in faith. Is there any monies that you know of, somebody who can help us? We have it under contract. I sold my van and I got the monies, put it down payment. So now we're doing a campaign starting tomorrow. With the social media and all that good stuff. So my question to this magnificent group right here, what help? How about that?
Now, did you post earlier about like how do you get a capital campaign up and moving right now and get some funds right away?
Yeah, I was doing the best I could. That was the first time I put some in chat in my life.
That was, well, thank you for that. I'm sorry we didn't get to it. It made me think about we are also doing a capital campaign. It made me think about how quickly we need to turn ours around.
Yeah.
So I'd be happy to talk to you offline and tell you a little bit about what we're doing.
Okay.
And I'm always happy to share the documents that we use, like literally the templates that we use and the tracking spreadsheets. If you want any of that, you're welcome to have it. And maybe we could have a talk about what you need to put together. Then we got to target the funders who support the area and the community that you're in, and maybe start with that and then get to that elusive one pager we keep talking about and figuring out which funders you send that to. Dawn, do you have anything to add? Turning the quick capital campaign around in community for Nella? You're still on mute.
Yes, I am. Yes, if you don't mind, send me a note because I might have somebody for you. I have a couple of social investors who are friends of mine that have a lot of money and they're waiting on their funding to come back. So let's have a conversation about how we can get you in on that conversation.
Okay, good. So do you all need my phone number, my email? I stuck an email in there.
Yeah, no,
We'll get it in the chat.
Yep, we'll grab your email address from the chat and I'll connect you and Dawn.
Okay, good. About when can you connect us?
How about today?
You can do it right now. I've already been emailing people.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for chatting for a question. Okay. Anybody else? Anybody brave enough to say their biggest concern right now or their biggest fear about fundraising in the moment?
My biggest fear is being a one-hit wonder and a complete failure. And I'm not so much upset about losing my money. I think I would be most upset that the community didn't see the vision, or maybe there was something I did that did not present the vision in a way that the community would buy into, I guess. I feel like I don't have to convince someone when there is a need. Either you see that need or not. And mine is in education and lifelong learning, kindergarten to forever. So I don't know. Since it's easy because I don't know anyone, so I can just spill my guts out without judgment.
Well, Brandy, you should be proud of yourself for taking the first step. Also, I think simplicity is key when you're starting out. Do what you do best and keep it simple. And one tool that we used recently in one of our CEO conversations helped us think about the partnerships that you might be best fit for. So not just funding partnerships, but Catherine, let's share that tool out to everybody too. It's kind of like your own little worksheet on who are my most natural partnerships, whether it's civic partnerships or funding partnerships. And again, having a conversation with Dawn would be great because she's out doing work in the community in a way that she has a ton of contacts and a lot of intel. So, but that worksheet will help everyone think about, like, for example, we started doing something called the Sam Howard Empowerment Fund. It is workshops for leaders of color for our workshops. So it's discounts to attend our CNM workshops if you identify as a leader of color. Those are available. That's a partnership with the Urban League. And we joined forces with the Urban League to figure out and identify what that need was. We don't need to be, as a primarily white organization, we don't need to be explaining to leaders of color what they need. We need to actually listen and figure it out and create a plan. So those types of partnerships and will help you maybe brainstorm and start to build some bridges. So we'll connect everybody to that too.
Is that going to be put in the chat, Marissa? Is that going to be sent out with the after the call?
That will be
Gonna
sent
have
out,
both.
ma'am. Yep, we can link.
You're gonna get both.
You get both. So we'll link to all of these things, and there'll be some attachments in that email too. Anybody else?
Brandy, I'm with
Go ahead.
Tucker's House, and we're a small nonprofit based in South Franklin. And can you guys hear me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yep.
I
You're
went
good.
But I come from large national nonprofits, so I applaud you for what you're doing. Hang in there.
Thank you.
I love being part of a grassroots small organization. It's amazing. So just get the community behind you. And our founder is actually from the Spring Hill, Columbia area. So
Oh,
and
wonderful.
use CNM as much as you can.
Will do.
Thanks, Wendy.
I think we know who's going to be using the rest of those match grants that's available for the rest of this year.
Got lots of opportunities.
Lots of scholarship opportunities. We've got the match grants, and then for the young leaders, we've got the Maddox Fund Scholarship too. So I'll add that to the chat just one more time because that closes tonight.
Yeah, and those are the Maddox Fund for Young Nonprofit Professionals. I think it's $1,000 per person to attend our workshops. Catherine will also link us to our event calendar where our 100 workshops a year live. We already have next year's planned, although I don't think they're on the calendar yet, but there are 10 more courses this year. And if you do work in terms of the Frist Foundation match grant funding, if you work for an organization that has a budget under 2 million, you're eligible for some of that support to attend the workshops.
I have another question.
Yes, Noah?
Is there any way we could, all the different organizations that's on here, is there any way that we could like know about each other or be able to support each other?
So we have a list of all, I would guess that not everyone on here is a CNM member, and that is the intention. We want to make sure we're opening up all of our events to people who are not members of CNM. So for those who are members, we have a list of all of our members on our website. We'll also link to that in the post-event email. I think for the registrants on this, Catherine, we don't necessarily share a list out, do we? And I guess the question to this group is does everyone want to do that?
We don't share a list out, but we definitely, if you're on LinkedIn, we highly encourage, networking and connecting on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, okay.
So will you have the chat, since the people who put their information in the chat would be deemed as, I want you to have my information? Could we do that?
Yep.
Will we
Yep.
send
Yes.
that
It'll
information?
all be in the email tomorrow.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah,
So
and
you'll get the
that's
majority.
that's a good point. Right now, if you do want to collaborate, or if you want to collaborate, maybe put your email in the chat and also say kind of what you want to collaborate on or what you're looking for, what support you need. We'd love to hear some of that. And then again, that partnership tool that we link to, that might help you think through it. So after you leave this call, if you work through that and you're like, I think I need a funder that focuses on this. I think I need a nonprofit who might focus on the other side of the work that I'm doing. Feel free to reach back out to Catherine or myself or Dawn and let us know who we can help you connect with.
Okay, yeah.
Well, Jesse, nice to see you.
I appreciate everyone staying around here to continue to talk. I love the fact that we've had up to 75 afterwards. So some people are dropping off things, but
amazing.
if y'all have any questions, don't forget to put them in the chat as well. We do have 12 says people leaving their information.
Cool.
Whatever questions you have, we're really good. I love Marissa. Marissa's work has been exceptional, not only in our organization, but in others. So you have the person here, the GOAT, who has the information. And Brandy, I just sent you a note. You just send me some Zoom days and times and we'll get you going. And the way, that's
Yeah.
for anybody out there, the way I work, send me some days and times that work for you, and we'll get a Zoom call and have your notebook ready, because I'm like a fire hydrant. It just, yeah, they'll
She is
tell
like
you.
a fire hydrant. That is very true. And like she said, anything you all need, if any of you are new to development and you're just like, yo, I don't even know where to start. I just don't have any sense of this or that. Like, we have so many, I didn't know where to start when I started. So I found a way, and I have found little tricks that work for me. So I've got lots of cool resources, even outside of CNM programming, that that you might be interested in. A couple other kind of buckets you might want to know about us too, if you're new to CNM, is we have workshops, yes. And most of those are, there's a member rate, and then there's a little bit more expensive non-member rate, but we have some of those workshop scholarships that we talked about. But outside of that, we also have four categories of convenings that are free every month. So we have our town halls like this. We do them once a month. They're on different topics. We're working on all the topics for next year. We have our Young Nonprofit Professionals group that Catherine runs. And you can learn everything from how to serve on a board, or how to, manage your own board better, or how to get better at development, or how to ask for a raise. There's lots of cool stuff in those sessions. We have a CEO conversation session that's for CEOs, obviously. And then Dawn runs a new series for us called our Community Conversations. These are bi-weekly conversations around race, social justice, cultural identity, really getting everyone to the table to share experiences, and so that we can learn and that we can help. So there's a lot of ways to plug in without having to, buy a program or invest finances in any way. We have 2 minutes left. Anybody else want to share, or even just say hi or ask a question?
Hi, my name is Kiemi. I'm just signed on with the nonprofit, working with older adults to age in place. I'm coming from a state position, which I felt like I wasn't serving people on the magnitude in which I wanted to. I knew that what I was doing was helping people in some way, but I was looking for like that instant gratification to knowing that I was making a difference, Coming to the nonprofit sector is definitely a different transition, obviously due to funding, than coming from a state organization. I just want to say I just actually appreciate the fact that I even thought to hang around, because you guys have been really resourceful. And it's nice to see other people who are going through different transitions along in their journeys of the nonprofit industry as well. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Cami. That's awesome. Congrats on your move.
It's the best thing that I could have ever done. A lot of people are like, you stay with state, you get your pension, and you get your benefits, and you stay there and you just grow there. And I was just like, yeah, I'm okay.
Well, you're gonna get your instant gratification, and you're also gonna work your butt off. So this will be the new life. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. All right, everybody, it's 4:30. We've really enjoyed spending time with you. It's great to see your faces. I just really meant what I said in the beginning, that celebrate yourself, because this has been a very difficult couple of years. And even if you're getting started or wherever you're at in your life, this is not easy work, and give yourself some grace for all of the strength and the hard work that you're putting into our community. We really appreciate your time. Catherine, anything you want to end with before we say goodbye?
Nope. This has been great. We're so thrilled to have everybody here today, and take a look for the email tomorrow. It'll have everything from today: contact information, recording, resources, links. It will probably be pretty comprehensive. So you'll have lots of options, but please don't hesitate to reach out to CNM if you have questions. That's ultimately, at the end of the day, what we're here to do, is to help support you. So
thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.
May the force be with you all.
Yes,
force
thank
be
you.
with you
Wait,
too,
hold on.
Nala.
I used to be.